Hey guys, my name's Aiden Collins,
And I'm Nate Booten.
and today we'll be presenting on the topic of the indoctrination of the Nazi soldier.
Our first slide is about the historical context of the time period. Hitler, along with the Nazi Party, came to power in 1933. Germany was economically ruined from their debts they had to pay from World War I. This, along with political instability, national humiliation, and a fragile economic state, Hitler was able to take advantage of this time to rise to power by promoting militarism, ultranationalism, racial purity, and anti-Semitism. Hitler claimed his ideals would be the solution to Germany's problems. Nazis would then keep this power through punishment, fear, and censorship. They would censor through schools, media, and many other ways. The Nazis indoctrinated the soldiers with demonizing their enemies, so when the first place they invaded was Poland, they demonized Jews and Bolsheviks, which were the start of the Communist Party in the Soviet Union. This brings us to our thesis. The Nazi ideology and the indoctrination of the German soldiers were used to turn the country against Jewish people and was spread through propaganda like military leader speeches, newspapers, and letters home from soldiers. Our first argument is the military leader speeches. German military leaders would give speeches to the soldiers claiming that Jewish people were beasts which fueled their soldiers. Often, the military leaders would give these speeches to the soldiers before battle. They would frame the war as a mission from God to save Europe from Jews and Bolsheviks. The Nazis would use this as justification for why they're invading the places that they were. This then brings us to the military leaders' speeches evidence. For example, in October 1941, a German commander named Walter Reichenau spoke to his soldiers, and this was a couple quotes from that. One quote saying, "The soldier must have full understanding of a severe but just revenge on subhuman Jewry." Perry 348. Another quote from this speech was saying, "This is the only way to fulfill our historic task to liberate the German people once and forever from the Hasidic Jewish danger." Also Perry 384. Also, in October 1941, during a speech to his soldiers, Major General von Bechtolsheim said, "Make every effort to remove Jews entirely from the villages." This was talking about how he wanted to kill every Jew from the countryside of the places he was invading. This was from Perry 384. Another quote from his speech was, "The Jews are our mortal enemies. These enemies are, however, no longer human beings in the sense of our European culture. Rather, they are raised to be criminals from their childhood on and are as criminally schooled beasts. Beasts must be destroyed." This was from Perry 384 and 385. All of these quotes were examples of how military leaders would use their speeches to fuel their soldiers by using hate on Jewish and Bolsheviks people.
The second way the Nazi ideology and the indoctrination of German soldiers was spread was through propaganda newspapers. There were many different newspapers and radio stations during this time that heavily promoted the Nazi ideologies. This propaganda began with the Jew being portrayed as subhuman, dangerous, and diseased throughout many different newspapers. Jewish people were also portrayed as greedy and responsible for Germany's economic problems, and that they were a threat to racial purity and national security. Papers began to publish Nazi doctors and scientists falsely claiming that Jewish people had biological traits that made them mentally, physically, and morally inferior. This promotion of propaganda was also used to convince the people of Germany that once war began with the Soviets, it was them protecting their country against an invasion from the USSR, and that it was the German soldiers' duty to annihilate Jewish-led Bolsheviks. Many newspapers and other sources of media portrayed the Soviet Union as being led by Jewish-led Bolshevik groups, which further pushed a bad reputation about Jewish people and Jewish groups. As for our evidence supporting newspapers promoting these Nazi ideologies and indoctrination, in September 1941, a notorious Jew-hating newspaper called Der Stürmer began circulating, especially among German soldiers, with German officers handing this newspaper out and it getting passed between platoons and different sections of the army. Famous words from this article that fueled some of the spread of hatred of Jews around the soldiers was, quote, "The source of world's disaster will be done away with forever, only when Jewry in its entirety has been annihilated." This quote, along with other many quotes hating on Jewish people, started to give people a prejudice towards Jewish people, especially people reading these articles. Our last supporting reason for the Nazi ideologies being spread throughout Germany and the indoctrination of the German soldiers was through letters home from German soldiers to their families, and this was mainly spreading prejudice and the Nazi ideals throughout the common people of Germany who were not at war. The impact of propaganda was further driven by these letters, especially after reading newspapers before they reached the mainstream German public. These letters from home deemed Jewish people subhuman and criminals who wanted to leave their stamp on Europe. Many of these letters contained reasoning for why the Bolsheviks and the Soviets needed to be invaded and how the ideals of Jewish people had begun to spread to them and their leaders, so it was almost essential for Germany to invade them and take over. Lots of letters, specifically in the textbook, reference a tank gunner, Karl Fuchs, who was a young idealistic German. These letters illustrate the grip the Nazi propaganda had on these German soldiers and their desire to write back home to their families and spread this further hatred and propaganda. Our evidence supporting these letters home having an impact, specifically from the tank gunner Karl Fuchs, is on August 3rd, 1941. He stated, quote, "These scoundrels, led by Jews and criminals, want to imprint their stamp on Europe, indeed on the world. Thank God our Führer, Adolf Hitler, is preventing this from happening." Another two soldiers who wrote letters home said, "When you see what the Jew has brought here to Russia, then, only then can you understand why the Führer has begun the struggle against Judaism." Another quote says, "The political doctrine of Bolshevism is but purely a political act of world Jewry." Now, all of this propaganda was very significant for the time. This indoctrination of soldiers soon spread to the rest of the people of Germany and played a widespread role in enabling Germans to commit these atrocities and aggressive military campaigns during World War II. The Nazi indoctrination was spread through the Hitler Youth and SS training programs to develop unquestionable loyalty, even if the party was committing war crimes and atrocities like the Holocaust. The idea had been adopted by soldiers and the public that the Aryan race was a superior race, and emphasized that Jewish and Slavic people were inferior and got in the way of German expansion. This idea was called Lebensraum, and centered around the idea that Germany needed to take over most of Europe and make the population strictly Aryan at the expense of Jews and other Slavic people and other races. Through this propaganda and education, the Nazis were able to dehumanize their enemies and make it easier to engage in these brutal acts they committed. The Nazi regime achieved its goal of aligning the state's ideology with the military, soldiers, and believing they were doing more than fighting a war. As for the significance for these events today, the indoctrination of these soldiers have carried many lessons and implications. Today, there are still governments and regimes that manipulate this information to control their populations and justify their government's actions. For example, in North Korea, today propaganda is used to dehumanize the West, specifically the USA, South Korea, and Japan, and its culture, and convince its citizens that North Korea is an economic power and flourishing country compared to the others. Additionally, the radicalization of Nazi ideals came from misinformation, and doctrines which unfortunately are still existing today due to lack of proper education. Far-right extremist groups today use online forums and social media to spread misinformation and hate, to indoctrinate young people using the internet into believing these radical ideas and going out and displaying these ideas through violence.
This brings us to our conclusion. All in all, Nazis spread propaganda through military leaders' speeches, newspapers, and letters home from soldiers to support the Nazi ideology and the indoctrination of the German soldiers. This was then used to turn the country against Jewish people, which was a scapegoat for the reasoning of invading countries. Thank you for listening to our presentation.